From ancient times, there existed an entity called the primordial intelligence that created this universe. This entity was soon divided into two halves representing thought and action. They fiercely fought over creation to the point of no return and created chaos. From this, many races emerged, all seeking fragments of intelligence to gain wisdom. But among them, one named Terrorblade looked into the chaos and found the truth. He had the idea of unifying thought and action to recreate everything into the hell he had envisioned. Back to the present, a squad of humans is now struggling to fight a dragon. It's causing difficulties for the entire squad, but that's until the protagonist Davian appears. He puts on his helmet and carries his sword, then runs down alone to confront the dragon. The dragon is completely countered by Davian. He uses ropes and begins to tie around its body, forcing it to burrow into the ground. But he goes down into its tunnel himself to face it once again. He skillfully strikes it once and begins to rise up, stabbing it repeatedly until it completely collapses. The others then come down to assess the situation. They discover dead dragon hatchlings nearby. It appears the hatchlings suddenly went mad and tore each other apart. Davian then discovers a hole, which seems to have been dug by a dangerous creature. They should consider themselves lucky for not encountering it as it's currently asleep. Davian then brings back the dragon's head and advises the squad commander to be less bloodthirsty and be glad they're alive, and absolutely not to be foolish enough to disturb the boss sleeping in that cave. But it seems the commander intends to ignore Davian's warning, calling him a coward. Davian then returns to town with his partner Bram, greeted by the joyful townspeople as the dragon has been eliminated. However, the losses from that battle are not something everyone can be happy about. Davian goes to comfort and encourage the family of a fallen soldier. He gives the soldier's son a dragon fang and encourages the boy to be proud of his father and carry on the dream of becoming a dragon-slaying hero like his father. The entire army then goes for a feast, drinking heavily. Bram continuously recounts Davian's achievements, while Davian goes to get another round for everyone. He encounters a girl buying something before him, so he lets her go first. She orders 2 beers but complains about the taste, so Davian pays for her. The owner then gives Davian's drinks for free because of his dragon-slaying feat. But that commander mocks Davian for leaving the boss in the cave without killing it. He reminds the commander straight that even 20 people couldn't defeat the boss down there, so don't be stupid enough to wake it up. If it wipes out the army, the people here will all die too. Meanwhile, the girl from earlier has returned to a table with a partner. They both meet a cloaked man to exchange and buy information. The man knows this girl is a princess, so he demands a higher price or no deal at all. But she has just given him her crown when someone in the tavern approaches the cloaked man to cause trouble. The cloaked man is revealed to be an elf, so he's looked down upon by the humans here. Davian comes to resolve the situation. He takes the man outside and lets the elf leave. During this time, that commander is drinking when some evil force incites and provokes the anger within him. From there, that entity has taken over his mind and decides to go provoke the boss in that cave. The next morning, Davian wakes up next to a girl. Suddenly, Bram runs to find him to report that the commander has lost his mind and is demanding to go kill the boss. Davian decides to go find him. He asks Bram to go to the fortress and call for support in case of the worst. Davian sets off while Bram cuts some blood from his hand to activate a magic circle and teleport away. Davian arrives at the cave and goes down to find the commander has already dealt with the boss, as it had grown old and weak, not as strong as he had feared. But he soon realizes this isn't the commander, but a powerful entity controlling him. The entity mentioned Davian's painful past to awaken his hatred for dragons. This entity could give him the power he needed to exterminate all dragons. But at this moment, the Fire Dragon King arrived. It was disappointed that the Earth Dragon King had grown so old and weak that it was easily defeated. It spewed fire to incinerate the commander. It gave Davian a chance to survive because it wasn't in the mood to eat today. However, that entity had transferred into the Earth Dragon's corpse. The 2 dragons then lunged at each other, attacking. They both breathed fire at each other and then pounced to bite and tear. The Earth Dragon charged straight in, wounding the Fire Dragon, but the Fire Dragon rose again and bit the Earth Dragon's neck. Davian took the opportunity to charge straight in and stab the Earth Dragon's weak point to help the Fire Dragon destroy it. The Fire Dragon showed respect for Davian. However, it was now severely wounded and near death. It knew Davian's upcoming fate would not be smooth, so it used its claw to cut across Davian's neck and told him not to hate it for the misfortunes about to befall him. The princess and her subordinate had now discovered Davian lying in the forest. She left a coat for Davian, knowing he wouldn't be happy when he woke up. Earlier, when Davian was injured by the dragon, he had crawled away, but on the way, he was intercepted by bandits who stripped him of all his possessions. He now wakes up and meets the princess again. He had barely regained consciousness when he fainted once more. That night, Davian woke up again, and the princess asked whose blood was on his neck. He thought it was his own. He didn't clearly remember what had happened in the cave, only that there were 2 dragons and they were both dead. He then asked the princess's name, and she revealed she was Marana, and he realized she was from the Night Silver Woods. But she was no longer the princess of that place. In the following days, Davian went along with Marana's group and arrived at a new town. He mentioned he knew an innkeeper here, so they could find temporary lodging. When they arrived at the inn, he apologized to Marana because the place was quite run down, but at least the innkeeper still remembered him and agreed to find him 2 rooms and some clothes to wear. That night, while drinking, Marana went to find the innkeeper to ask about the location of the black market. Davian wanted to go along as Marana's bodyguard, but he was drunk and suddenly vomited up a ring. Someone in the tavern recognized this as his comrade's ring. A few days ago, he had heard rumors that his comrade was killed, the body went missing, and only Davian's Dragon Slayer armor was at the scene. He began calling Davian a cannibal and started causing trouble, forcing Davian to chase him away. He then fainted again, and when he woke up, the 2 women had already gone to the black market. The innkeeper had to ask Davian to leave because he would bring trouble to the inn. Davian respected the innkeeper and wanted to borrow a sword from him before leaving, but he had none to give. Meanwhile, Marana and her maid had arrived at the black market to find the person to whom the elf had previously passed information. She was soon brought to meet the owner of this place, and surprisingly, the elf from before was there. He had tricked her here because he had a deal with her uncle to bring her back. She regretted not letting the villagers kill him earlier. The black market owner then captured both of them. Davian at this time went to a forge to ask about buying a sword, but he only had this ring to pay with. However, the owner here knew who he was and what would happen if he accepted this ring. Nevertheless, he was willing to sell Davian a sword if he had coins, and he was also kind enough to tell him where he could quickly get them. Meanwhile, Marana was about to be separated from her maid, but unfortunately for the people at the black market, the maid was her strongest weapon. The maid easily dealt with the people there herself and let Marana handle the elf. She forced him to reveal the real information she needed. He was afraid of Marana's maid, so he had to confess and warned her that the place she was going to wasn't safe for her at all, but she didn't care. Davian, at this time, went to make money by gambling. He didn't win anything, so he had to return empty-handed. As for Marana, she had gone with her maid to a shop. She knew this shopkeeper specialized in locating treasures, and she needed to find some kind of lotus flower. The man knew who she was and the lotus treasure she was looking for. He knew someone who could help her, a sage living in a tower in the southern valley. The shopkeeper gave her a stone that could help her meet this person, and he only asked her to repay him when she had regained her princess status. She then went to find Davian and invited him to go with her, but he wanted to stay to confront the man who had beaten him last night, as he said he would bring his gang to settle scores with him at noon. Davian was the type of person who wouldn't run away from a fight, so he refused to flee with her. He thought running away would be an insult to his honor. She thought he was a fool and left. The maid had given Davian a small knife as a little help before leaving. She then went to the forest and called for her mount, but the maid noticed that the bandits had come to find Davian. The maid wanted to help him and had convinced Marana to lend a hand. Davian was now facing the leader of this group alone. The 2 sides engaged in combat, and Davian's technique was still slightly better than his, but he called his subordinates to rush in and gang up on Davian. He was slashed in the back and stabbed, causing him to collapse, but Marana above had shot arrows down with such accuracy that they pierced the head of each man. Yet at this moment, Davian suddenly transformed and became a monster. He continuously tore apart every man he saw until only the last snitch remained. He had taken Davian's glowing blade to defend himself. Davian looked at the blade and remembered who he was, so he transformed back into a human. Marana and the maid had run over and asked if he was okay. He didn't understand what had happened to him, but Marana wanted him to follow her or face the guards over there. He followed her. She had told him about her quest to find a sage. He decided to go with her and hoped that the sage would have knowledge about dragons and would help him find a solution for his condition. Meanwhile, we know that the lotus flower Marana is looking for is currently being held by a group of elf. This elf girl had sneaked into the Silvermoon Forest, where Marana ruled, to steal this lotus flower. She was soon discovered and attacked by Marana. Marana had shot a rain of arrows because the elf girl could create doppelgangers. When the real one was exposed, Marana only managed to shoot once, grazing the elf girl's hand. The reason the elf girl stole this flower was because she believed it would help her and her group return home. Throughout a week of traveling with Marana, Davian constantly had nightmares and felt like he could turn into a beast at any moment if he didn't wake up. He told Marana that he dreamed of dragons talking to him. He felt as if the dragons were inside his body. He could only hope that the sage she was looking for would give him a solution. Meanwhile, we learn that those elves took the lotus to resurrect their god. They worshipped the moon god, who had been submerged into darkness by the dark moon goddess. Many still worshipped the dark moon goddess, even though it was no different from putting faith in a demon. And the only way to bring back the moon goddess was through a mage using this lotus to set up a ritual. The girl who had stolen the lotus then packed to go find the mage, but the whole group chose to go with her whether she agreed or not. Back to Davian's group. They were now climbing a snowy mountain and had to tie themselves together in case they were blown by the wind. They could still be pulled back by the mountain front. But right after that, the ground began to sink, causing Marana to fall down. Her sudden fall meant Davian and the mount couldn't pull her up in time. She was pulling more people down, so she decided to cut the rope to fall. She survived the fall, but was now separated from the group. Meanwhile, the elf girls' group had found the point they needed to reach. After a journey, they had entered the mage's dwelling. This place was hidden in a barrier, and inside was a vast flower field and a tower. The group had entered the tower and soon became separated. The girl had gone on without realizing she had been separated from everyone else. Then she met the mage, who asked her how she found her way here when no one had for hundreds of years. She just said she simply found it without any special technique. She introduced herself as Rin and brought the lotus flowers to ask him to resurrect the moon goddess. But he only took the lotus flowers and called her a thief. He informed her that he couldn't resurrect the goddess because death was something that couldn't be interfered with. He then teleported her and her group out of there. She had now almost lost all hope because all her efforts had been in vain. Back to Marana. She was now wandering in a snowstorm when she accidentally entered a cave. This cave surprisingly had a cannibal, and in self-defense, Marana had to kill him to survive. She asked the gods for forgiveness and was then attracted by something inside. This thing also attracted other cannibalistic monsters. As she was approaching, she was suddenly awakened by a voice. As soon as she woke up, the monsters immediately targeted her. She ran outside, but it was equally crowded out there. She closed her eyes and started shooting arrows, but the overwhelming numbers gradually put her in a difficult position. Luckily, Davian arrived in time to save her. Meanwhile, the group of the elf girl Rin had encountered a female assassin. She demanded the lotus flowers from her, but she no longer had them. The assassin didn't believe her, so she killed Rin's friends right in front of her, causing her to flee in fear. But the assassin used her technique and found Rin's location, and fortunately, the mage came to save her. He decided to change his mind and would try to help her resurrect the goddess. Marana had told Davian about the things she saw in the cave and thought that those monsters were even more soulless than Davian when he was in beast form. She then asked permission to rest and asked Davian to watch the monsters for her. The next day, Davian's group had arrived at a nearby city, and he noticed Marana's hand was injured, so he took her to get it bandaged. He then gave Marana a bottle of wine to warm her body. He also told her that if she had anything on her mind, she could talk to him. But suddenly, they both heard a noise outside the city, so they went to check. They met Catan, whom Davian knew was also a dragon knight like him, and he had just returned from hunting a dragon alone, with almost no injuries. He then carried the dragon inside to butcher it. Davian felt strange seeing this scene, so he left. Davian had told Marana that he felt like hitting Cadden when he saw him butchering the dragon, and even at dinner, he didn't touch the meat plate as if he saw dragons as his own kind. Cadden later gave Marana a bag of dragon scales to help her descend the mountain more easily. He revealed that he came here to settle a debt. 20 years ago, he and 30 comrades came here to hunt dragons, but on a night when the whole group was drinking, suddenly a dragon attacked, forcing the whole group to rush into the town that was burning as bright as day. They encountered the dragon, but its power was immense. The commander who had taught him was incinerated instantly, and out of the group of 30, only he survived. He had vowed to avenge it and had been hunting it ever since. But when he found its nest, he only saw dragon corpses and a human corpse along with this necklace of Davian's. He thought Davian had accidentally entered the fire dragon's nest, and when witnessing its power, he had fled in fear. Yes, the dragon he was looking for was the one Davian had encountered. He needed the information Davian had, but he could barely remember anything from his encounter with that dragon. Davian then left the dinner table, and Marana asked him what was wrong, as he had just met someone he admired. She thought it should have been something to make him better, but he looked even worse. He still thought he was fine, so Marana had to share with him her feelings when she was in that cave, that she had spent her whole life just running away, and it wasn't until she saw the scene in that cave that she realized what she needed. She kissed him on the forehead to bless Davian and then went back to her room. During that time, the sorcerer used a lotus flower to separate his soul and fly to meet the Dark Moon Goddess. She was currently killing one of her followers and absorbing the remaining life force to increase her power. The sorcerer arrived, and it seemed they had known each other for a long time, but he had renounced his name, and the goddess couldn't do anything to him. So she planned to seduce him with her powers. Davian was dreaming about what happened in the cave when he suddenly woke up and was knocked unconscious by Cadden. Marana sensed this and ran to search, finding Cadden carrying Davian somewhere. He had taken Davian to the basement to imprison him, as he knew the dragon was hiding inside him. He stabbed Davian's shoulder to force the dragon out. It had to reveal itself and began arguing with Cadden. He had waited 20 years to meet and hunt it again, but it recognized him as the little mouse that had run away from it years ago, and his 20 years of preparation would become meaningless. He then unchained it to fight, and indeed he had prepared very well, wearing the chaos armor that allowed him to move at extremely high speeds. He was later interrupted by Marana's group coming down, but he easily threw them all away. However, Marana managed to temporarily disable his armor. The dragon then grew larger and continued fighting. Marana's group, seeing this, fled, while the dragon continuously pushed Cadden into difficult positions. He then ran up to lure the dragon into a difficult position to counterattack. The two then chased each other outside, and Marana worried that one of them would die from this, but the dragon rushed in and took Marana's group away. We know that the sorcerer and the goddess were once lovers. They had a child together but lost it, and the sorcerer still hated the goddess because she had forgotten about their lost child. He decided to gather an army to fight against her. He then left, while the goddess, feeling very angry, went down to Earth to meet the female assassin from before. She ordered the assassins to eliminate all the elf who didn't worship her. The Dark Moon Goddess's army then gathered and was teleported to villages all over. The army gave the villagers a chance to submit to the goddess and lay down their weapons, but they chose to resist, so the army had to fight. After burning down the village, the army brought them to meet the Dark Moon Goddess to see if she would accept them once again. As for Marana's group, the dragon had taken her to where she needed to find the sage, but she couldn't see the tower anywhere. Davian woke up in a strange place at this time. He went up to the mountain top and surprisingly discovered many other dragons there. They were high-level dragons like the fire dragon out there. They were surprised when he appeared there. The dragons let Davian know that the fire dragon was trying to fight against Terrorblade, who was the one who had taken over the commander's body and then the earth dragon's body before. Terrorblade was also hunting these dragons. Meanwhile, Marana discovered that the stake Cadden had stuck into Davian's shoulder was still stuck in the dragon's body, so she tried to pull it out. But the stake woke up the dragon and made it lose its mind, chasing and attacking her. Marana, her maid Marcy, and the mount then fell straight down the cliff. Davian at this time tried to regain control but failed. The dragons asked him who he really was and why he was here. He couldn't remember, so the dragon who seemed to be the leader of this group approached and helped him remember. The maid Marcy was injured at this time, and Marana tried to take her away, but Marcy turned back to reach for the stone that Marana needed to find the sage. All three then ran away and were constantly chased by the fire-breathing dragon. They had to hide in a cave, but it still breathed fire, forcing Marana to hit the rocks to collapse and block the fire. Davian at this time remembered that he had fought Terrorblade with the fire dragon, but then it killed him. But the dragons believed that the fire dragon did so to prevent itself from being possessed by Terrorblade like the earth dragon. Davian wanted them to take him back to prevent Marana and Marcy from being eaten, but the nature of dragons is to eat, and he believed they wouldn't help him. So he offered to help them confront Terrorblade. However, even though he said this, they still had to ask him a question. Meanwhile, Marana had found temporary shelter and bandaged Marcy's wounds. She then felt helpless because she couldn't find the sage's location, but Marcy realized that she just needed to look through the stone. She immediately knew the sage's location, but she could only let the Mount and Marcy go ahead while she stayed behind to distract the dragon. The dragons at this time had asked why Davian chose to help them, while he was originally a dragon slayer, someone who had killed so many of their kind. What made them trust him? He thought dragons were a threat to humans, but they argued that humans die for many different reasons, so why were only dragons seen as harmful? He said directly that he hated dragons because they had killed his father and his village, but he still chose to fight alongside the fire dragon because he realized the threat from Terrorblade was greater than that from dragons. But the dragons still believed he had to die if he wanted to officially resurrect the fire dragon. Meanwhile, the dragon had begun to corner Marana and was about to eat her. Davian had to tell the dragons to kill him if they wanted to and find a way to save Marana. But at that moment, the fire dragon awoke and stopped the dragons from touching Marana. He regained his body and then caught Marana. He wanted to take her for treatment, but she showed him the location of the tower. Not long after, Rin realized they had visitors, and the sorcerer also knew who they were. The sorcerer saw that both girls were seriously injured and refused to help. But the stone from the shopkeeper that Marana had met earlier was actually an agreement for the sorcerer to make an effort to save both. Rin wanted to deal with Marana right away because she was from the Night Silver Woods and also a follower of that Dark Moon goddess, but the sorcerer stopped her. Meanwhile, the elf villagers who chose to follow the Dark Moon goddess had a kind of drug applied to their foreheads, and after reciting the oath, they would be officially controlled by the goddess. Suddenly, some soldiers from the Night Silver Woods returned with injuries all over their bodies. They were severely traumatized and panicked when asked about what they had seen in the forest. Davian had woken up at this time. He had been teleported by the sorcerer to meet him. He asked why he came here, and Davian asked about the demon Terrorblade. But the sorcerer knew the girl's wounds were caused by a dragon, not a demon. So Davian also confessed that the dragon was himself. The assassin had now called the village elder to ask what was in the forest, but he was also almost clueless because the people here were forbidden to enter there. She ignored this and led the army into it, bringing the elder along to guide the way. But suddenly a wooden stake flew out and killed a soldier. Many wooden stakes then continuously flew out, and even shields were useless. The elder also got hit by a stake and died. The assassin cast moonlight down to illuminate an attack. But this method was useless as an army of elf rushed out to counterattack. The Night Silver Woods army was soon pushed back and forced to retreat. But before they could go far, the assassin called for the troops to return, and what they received was a haunting scene of corpses hung up as if to challenge them. As for Davian, the sorcerer had told him that there were a total of 8 dragons, and they represented the pillars of the worlds. Terrorblade desired the power of all 8 dragons to recreate the world according to his will. The dragon hiding in Davian would temporarily prevent Terrorblade from finding it, but that was only a matter of time. He had placed a charm on the ring to help him avoid being possessed by the dragon. But this was also a temporary measure, because the longer it was suppressed, once it burst out, it would bring calamity to this whole world, and he would die when it escaped. Rin was now praying to her own goddess. She discovered Davian passing by, so she hid away. And as for that assassin, we now know her name is Luna. She has now also begged for power from the Dark Moon goddess to be able to avenge her troops. The goddess has allowed her to do whatever she wants as long as she keeps love for the goddess in her heart. Marana has now regained consciousness. She meets Marcy again and the mage who brought her to meet Davian. He asks her if she still serves the Dark Moon Goddess, which she does, so he tells her the truth about her, that she is a cruel being. She once heard a prophecy about the elf army overthrowing her, so she created the army to purge the elf. And right now, the loss of the lotus flowers is causing her to gradually lose her powers, which is why she is panicking and starting to attack indiscriminately. The elf army is now being constantly hit by Luna's moonlight, and their formation is breaking apart. With nowhere to hide, they no longer pose any threat to her. As for Marana, she realizes that this mage is actually the Chaos Mage Invoker, who desires to bring about the apocalypse. But he only wants peace. He will return the flowers to her, but on the condition that she must persuade her goddess to withdraw from where the elf are living. She still doesn't trust him, but he gives her time to think, because as long as she hasn't made a choice, the deal with the shopkeeper will still protect her. She and Davian then stood and talked with each other. Marana now doesn't know if she is really perceiving everything correctly, whether it's the goddess she has been with for 10 years or the mage she just met. However, Davian still somewhat trusts the mage. Marana doesn't know what to do now, so Davian advises her to try being a dragon knight. Davian feels he is now very afraid. The two then decide to kiss each other. Rin was about to attack, but was teleported back to the mage's place. She thinks he is planning to return the lotus flowers to that goddess, but he has his own beliefs and wants her not to doubt his decision. Meanwhile, Luna has found the location of the rebel leader. The leader believes that even if he dies, there will be many other rebels, but Luna has killed the leader's comrades. She will let the leader live as a warning to those who intend to rebel, because there are many martyrs, but would anyone dare to watch their comrades or family die? Marana has now received the box containing the lotus flowers. Invoker has locked the box, and it will open when the Dark Moon Goddess's army withdraws from elf territory. She has accepted, and Rin will be their guide. Both still hold grudges but respect Invoker and follow the agreement. Invoker also realizes that Davian hasn't told anyone about him dying when the dragon awakens, so he keeps quiet for him. He will go with Marana and return to find him when she has finished her task. So Invoker gave him a suit of armor to help him fight in case he turns into a monstrous form, and is naked when he returns to human form. Luna has now returned to meet the goddess, and she is dissatisfied with Luna's cruel actions. But she believes Luna will find a way to make her forgive. As for Invoker, he has now contacted Terrorblade to propose a deal. Not long after, Invoker went by himself to face one of the pillar dragons. He confronts the ocean dragon and begins to bind it with his magic. After a struggle, he has tamed it, but his body is also exhausted. As for Davian, in the time after that, he almost couldn't sleep due to dreams of him being swallowed by the dragon if he transforms. The next day, Marana came to tease Davian like a normal lover, but he was just depressed and said he was about to die. She thought Davian was joking because he just woke up from being drunk. She then turned to pack up, while Rin came to tease Davian about arguing with his girlfriend. On the way, Rin constantly joked with Davian, making Marana somewhat jealous. Davian realized this, so he came to comfort his girlfriend. Suddenly, he moves forward and tells the group to stand still. He detected some wind dragons, so he told everyone to stand close together to avoid being discovered by them. He then realized this was the dragon's hunting ground. These hunt based on their prey's movements, so they should sneak and stand still when the dragons show signs of movement. But it's better to find shelter to avoid being caught by them. As for Invoker at this time, he is exhausted and remembering his daughter from years ago. He had brought her here, given her a flower field, and created this tower to be their home. He noticed red spots on his daughter's hand and asked how long this had been happening. The little girl said it was since she left her mother, which worried him greatly. He wasn't sure what illness she had, but had to try to find a way to cure it. In the time after that, he immersed himself in research to find a cure, but his efforts seemed to lead nowhere. Back to Davian's group, after escaping the dragons, they decided to set up camp to rest in the forest. Marana now starts to show jealousy about Davian always talking to Rin. While setting up camp, Rin thinks Davian is lucky to have a girlfriend accompanying him, but he only admits that one of the two girls is his girlfriend. Rin told about how she once had a group of lovers, but they were all killed by people from the Night Silver Woods. Marana got angry, claiming this was Rin's own fault, as she had stolen the lotus flowers and triggered everything. The two girls were about to shed blood when Davian stopped them. Rin then left and Davian scolded Marana for not telling him anything about the two of them knowing each other from before. Originally, Marana wanted to wait and see if Rin was hiding anything, but Davian blamed her for not telling him earlier. She tried to explain, but he had barely paid attention to her throughout the journey. She asked why he had been silent with her throughout the trip, but he didn't answer and went to find Rin before she encountered any dragons. He went to call Rin because he knew she was hiding nearby. He believes Marana had no ill intentions and advises her to return to the camp because they've lost enough already. Marana then confided in Marseille, but Marseille had already gone to sleep, so she also rested. Davian lay outside keeping watch for a while, then also slept. And Rin had been eyeing the box containing the lotus flowers in there. Back to Invoker's story, he had almost no way to cure his daughter, until one day, he discovered his daughter had found a type of flower that instead of facing the sun, faced the moon. He realized what he needed to do, which was to bring his daughter to meet her mother, who is the dark moon goddess. Back to Davian, Marana has informed him that Rin has once again stolen the lotus flowers. She has gone into the territory of the air dragons, but there's no need to worry because Rin is very difficult to catch. Rin has now run to the river and was soon discovered by the dragons. Their strength is speed, so they dive down very quickly. Rin must quickly run to the darkness because she has the ability to teleport a short distance if in darkness. But just as she hid in the shadows, she dropped the box, so she had to go back to get it and was chased by dragons. She then discovered a cave, so she aimed for it. Davian then discovered Rin running to the cave, so he decided to run in to help, because it was a dragon's nest, not a normal cave. Marana then had to stay outside to deal with some dragons, while Davian had run into the cave and saw a dragon fly by. He hid to let it fly past before chasing after. Rin at this time had to hide in a small hollow and Davian quickly rushed over and wanted to clear a path for her to run. But she refused, so he also had to squeeze into that hollow to hide with her. He wanted to keep the box so she could escape, but she refused, so he wondered if this box was worth her life, and she truly was ready to die for this thing. So he decided to stay here and die with her. He started to reason with Rin, and she decided to give the box back to him to keep. She then teleported outside and threw dragon eggs to lure them elsewhere. Davian also soon went out, but the dragon had returned, forcing him to confront it. But they didn't dare come close because they saw the fire dragon inside him. He then went outside and met Marana again. He knew he shouldn't hide from her anymore. Originally, he was afraid she would have to bear his burden, but he didn't want to hide from her anymore. He told her about how he would die if the dragon escaped again. The group then continued on their journey and Marana confronted Rin. The two girls decided to travel together out of respect for Davian. We returned to Invoker, who years ago had brought his daughter to the Dark Moon Goddess to ask for her help in curing the girl. Although faced with a seriously ill child, she wanted a condition that both father and daughter must worship and love her as a goddess. Though Invoker had humbled himself to accept, the little girl refused. She loved her as a mother, not as a goddess. She loved her but would not worship her, so the goddess left despite Invoker's desperate pleas. And now he has drained the life force of everything around him to recover himself. Not long after, we meet Cadden again. He had entered the air dragon's cave and dealt with them swiftly. He discovered Davian had passed through here, so he told his people to move gradually northward. Davian's group has now found the scene of hanged elf corpses. Rin went up to cut the ropes for them so Marana could bury them properly. They then came to a village that had been attacked by people from the Night Silver Woods. The army quickly rushed out and fortunately recognized Marana as their princess, so they let the group pass. They then arrived at the camp and Marana met Luna again. She brought the box inside to confront Luna. The two had never liked each other, so Luna kept claiming that it was Marana's weakness that had caused so many calamities as now. But Marana argued that the current suffering was due to Luna's cold-blooded nature. After enough bickering, Marana brought out the box and stated Invoker's condition. Luna seemed not to trust it much. Meanwhile, Rin and Davian realized they were being held by the soldiers. Rin could escape, but Davian didn't want to. She also couldn't leave because she couldn't abandon her people. Luna then went to report to the goddess and returned to tell Marana that tomorrow they would accept Invoker's condition and withdraw their troops. Back to Davian, knowing he was about to part with Marana, he was practicing his farewell words. But Marcy came to give him a goodbye hug. He then went inside to ask Marana if she really wanted to return to the Night Silver Woods. She still believed the goddess needed her. Davian said he would leave, although Marana thought he could come to the Night Silver Woods with her. But he believed he was beyond cure and didn't want to harm the place she loved. He then said that if she ever needed him, she should contact him and he would come to help. Meanwhile, Rin had sneaked into the prison to find the commander of the previous rebellion. She apologized for stealing the lotus flowers which caused such losses. She was trying to fix everything, but the resistance leader was too discouraged. She had accepted the fact that the Night Silver Woods was the winning side. The elf had been hiding for a long time and taught humans about their dangers so humans wouldn't bother them. But now they were the rulers and stronger, while the elf were slowly dying. The soldiers then heard voices and came in, but Rin had already escaped. She looked at the children gradually being corrupted into followers of the Dark Moon Goddess, felt disappointed and left with Davian. Meanwhile, Marana and Luna had taken the box and brought it up to start unlocking it. As soon as they offered it to the goddess, the box opened and the flowers were suddenly sucked up into the sky. The blessing of the goddess of the Night Silver Woods army had disappeared and the elf army knew it. Marana knew war was about to break out, so she requested a ceasefire and said her side would withdraw. But the elf had lost too much and now they wanted revenge. This whole scene was orchestrated by Invoker, and what he wanted was revenge on the goddess who had abandoned his daughter. Meanwhile, in the temple of the Dark Moon Goddess, the high priestess there suddenly transformed and became the demon Terrorblade. He had controlled and turned the followers there into his army. But the goddess had descended and decided to confront Terrorblade. Meanwhile, Rin and Davian had returned to find a chaotic scene here. The two then charged into the battle. At this moment, Luna encounters the leader of the rebel faction. She is confident that she can now fight on par with Luna, who has lost her power from the goddess. However, Luna's fighting ability is still slightly superior as she manages to knock away her opponent's weapon. But at this moment, Rin returns and continuously teleports to slash Luna repeatedly. Luna is weakened by numerous wounds and then collapses. Rin thinks she has avenged her lovers, but her hands are truly stained with blood. Davian has also charged in here and notices Marana. She is coming to heal Luna, so he quickly runs towards her, but he is blocked by many elf. Left with no choice, he removes the necklace given by Invoker to transform into a semi-dragon form. He maintains his sanity as he charges up and then descends with a super powerful strike. Returning to Terrorblade, he keeps mentioning how the goddess abandoned her daughter to provoke her. She realizes that it was Invoker who brought Terrorblade here to torment her. But he and Invoker only have one agreement with each other: the souls of his 7 children in exchange for the soul of this goddess. She then flies up to the magic circle to escape from Terrorblade, but he appears behind her and binds her. He punches her once, pushing her to the ground, and the magic circle above shatters. He reveals that a goddess without love like her is nothing but food for him. She now regrets, but it's too late. As for Davian, he has cleared a path for Marana's group to escape, but right after that, Kaden's dragon hunting group arrives. He has bound Davian. The dragon tells him to release it so they can quickly settle their grudges, but he came for Davian, not for it. He then releases some kind of smoke that turns Davian back into human form. Davian is then taken away, while Rin has taken the sealing rope given by Invoker and runs off to find Davian. Meanwhile, Marana still doesn't know what happened at the temple, but she fears something bad has occurred. Terrorblade has absorbed enough fear from the goddess, so he leaves her and departs. Right after that, Invoker arrives to find her and finish the rest. Davian has now regained consciousness and finds himself in a cage, brought back to Kaden's fortress once again. Rin is still following the group. Invoker has now taken over the temple of the Dark Moon Goddess, and she is imprisoned in the tower where he once lived with his daughter. Invoker has come to find her and believes that she will now be forgotten and lose her power. But she thinks Invoker won't be able to fulfill his deal with Terrorblade, so if he wants, he should resurrect her and restore her to the peak of her power to deal with him. But he doesn't care because what he wants is for the goddess to die in oblivion. Outside, Marana and Luna are still struggling to leave the forest. The number of soldiers is decreasing day by day, and the number of wounded is increasing. Marana wants Luna and the soldiers to rest for a while, but Luna almost ignores everything Marana says. As for Davian, he is now constantly explaining to Catelyn and the Knight Commander about how the dragons are not as dangerous as the demon Terrorblade, and that they need to join forces with the dragons to defeat him for now. But cooperating with dragons is the most ridiculous thing for a dragon knight, so his words are almost worthless. Catelyn now meets his master, this old golden armor. He thinks Catelyn has wasted over 20 years of his life to avenge a dragon, but Catelyn doesn't see the path he has chosen as a mistake. Catelyn then comes to find that Davian has had a piece of flesh taken for experimentation. He has warned the Knight Commander not to hurt Davian to avoid waking the dragon. He now decides to trust Davian and tells him to meet him in the Great Hall when he has recovered. Meanwhile, the soldiers of the Nightsilver Woods have found a place to rest tonight. This used to be a temple of the Dark Moon Goddess, but is now abandoned. Luna no longer wants to believe in the goddess, but Mirana still thinks that even though the goddess has disappeared, the soldiers still choose to pray to her. During that time, Rin had come to rescue Davian from prison. Davian asked why she followed him here, and she said that she and Mirana needed him. When he asked about Mirana, he learned that she was temporarily safe. Rin felt guilty about what had happened because she had known about Invoker's plot from the beginning. Davian was shocked when Rin admitted this. He thought that perhaps the Chief Knight was right about not trusting anyone outside the Dragon Knights. He then sent Rin away, and shortly after, the Chief Knight also released Davian. He asked if there was any way to extract the dragon from him, but the Chief Knight wasn't sure and only brought out some notes. These notes revealed that half-human, half-dragon beings like Davian had appeared before, but they were born with dragon genes rather than being possessed like him. However, there was a possibility that he was truly a person of the Dragon Clan, and would never return to his original form. Davian later met his comrade Bram, who admitted he was still a bit worried about Davian's condition. Davian honestly said that he was still in control and would not harm Bram or anyone in the Night Order. He was then taken back to his cell, while Rin remained outside observing the situation, waiting for an opportunity. Catelyn later came to call people for a hunt when he suddenly heard that the Chief Knight was calling for him. When he arrived, the Chief Knight asked everyone except Catelyn to leave. He revealed that he had just found a formula to turn Davian's blood into a super strength serum. With this power, they would have the strength and regenerative abilities of dragons, allowing them to exterminate the dragon race to the last one. But Catelyn then left, and we learn that this was actually Rin in disguise. She was terrified by the Chief Knight's desire. As for Mirana and Luna, they were now forced to find an escape route as they were about to reach the hunting grounds of the Wind Dragons. Luna decided to split their forces. She would sacrifice herself as bait to allow Mirana to lead the others around and escape this place. Meanwhile, the Chief Knight had consumed a dose of the serum made from Davian's blood. He gained the ability to regenerate and enhance his body as he wanted. But before he could experience it for long, he reverted back to human form. The thirst for power made him want even more serum. Rin then came to find Davian once more and wanted to warn him to leave. He didn't want to believe her, so Rin had to embrace Davian and teleport him away. The Chief Knight was now beginning to suffer side effects from the serum and started vomiting blood. He tried to reach for the vial of blood on the floor, and at that moment, Terrorblade's eyes appeared. Luna was about to reveal herself as bait when she realized Mirana had left before her. Mirana was now facing the battle alone, and she could almost single-handedly deal with all the elf blocking their escape route. She soon returned to Luna, and at the same time, Terrorblade in the Chief Knight's body came to find Davian to reclaim what was rightfully his. The entire fortress began to shake, and outside, a horde of dragons was approaching. The castle then had to defend against these dragons. They were ice dragons, and anyone touched by their flames would be frozen. Once frozen, death was certain. Bram was trying to defend when he realized they had concentrated in one place for a total attack. Bram called for everyone to retreat, but he himself was caught. Catelyn rushed out to save Bram and then turned back to run inside before the gate closed. Meanwhile, Terrorblade revealed that he now had the power to manipulate the dragons. So now, either Davian handed over the fire dragon, or this would be the tomb for him and his comrades. When Davian demanded he return the Chief Knight, Terrorblade said he needn't worry about him because he had been planning to drain Davian's blood to create the power serum. Davian then lunged to attack, forcing Rin to teleport him elsewhere. She believed he shouldn't engage in a battle he couldn't win. When he wanted to live or die with his Dragon Knight brothers, she reminded him that he was the one who had enlightened her about how to value life. After that, an Earth Dragon appeared and chased both of them. The dragon was temporarily stuck, so Davian ran to find weapons. On Mirana's side, she discovered that Luna had been infected due to her wound being exposed for too long. They knew of a nearby fortress and hoped it could treat Luna. The dragons had now started to breach the fortress. The Earth Dragon then came to attack Kaden's group of knights. Kaden told his master to quickly find the Knight Commander and get more weapons to fight them. But Kaden was quickly thrown off by the Earth Dragon. His master rushed out to fight it and managed to cut the Earth Dragon's head in half. But an Ice Dragon was about to attack from behind, causing him to lose focus and allowing the Earth Dragon to revive and bite off half of his body. With only Bram and Kaden left, he told Bram to quickly find the Knight Commander. They both temporarily evaded the dragons and left. Meanwhile, Mirana's group had reached the fortress they were heading to. She had Marcy blow the horn for the other side to open the gate. Once inside, Mirana asked the captain there to let them stay for a while so the soldiers could recover. He couldn't decide, so for now, he just told her to bring the people in for treatment first. She informed him that the elf tribe would soon be here and hoped they were ready to deal with it. But the commander was confident that no one could drag them out of this place. Kaden and Bram had now reached the Knight Commander's room and saw a mess there, but it didn't seem to be caused by dragons. Luna had only received first aid for her wound and needed to rest for a week to recover. But they were now very close to the border and would be easily attacked. Staying longer was dangerous, so Mirana decided they would leave tomorrow. She then went to tell everyone, and they decided to rest well tonight to leave tomorrow. At this moment, the captain came to meet Mirana and said that the commander of this place wanted to see her. She then entered the command room alone and discovered that the real commander here had been killed. The killer was an archer with the ability to turn targets into gold. She was a bounty hunter hired to bring Mirana back. Meanwhile, her soldiers and Marcy outside had been drugged by the soldiers here. Davian had now retrieved his armor and the dragon shield. The Earth Dragon and Ice Dragon then came to attack, forcing him to use the shield to block, causing the Ice Dragon's attack to hit the Earth Dragon. But another Earth Dragon came. Bram and Kaden had now reached Davian's location. He then swung his sword, cutting through the wall and the Earth Dragon's head. He and Davian then confronted the Earth Dragon, but the Ice Dragon was still flying above, so Davian was thrown up by Kaden to deal with it. Another Ice Dragon appeared, and Davian threw a fire spear at it to take it down. At this moment, Terrorblade arrived. He invaded the minds of all four people, starting with Davian. Davian was predetermined to die, but then turned into a horrible thing that only knew how to slaughter. For Rin, she carried many stories about the moon in her head and imagined herself as a goddess, but in reality, she was just a monster. For Bram, he was someone who always fulfilled his duty, but just holding a sword wasn't enough to become a dragon knight. For Kaden, he was a lonely person. Out of 30 people who went to battle, only he returned. Terrorblade told them, Davian would bring doom to the Dragon Knights. Rin would only cause more deaths by believing Invoker's lies. Bram would always be overshadowed and die serving others' glory. Kaden was so pathetic that he didn't dare avenge his comrades out of respect for the only brother he trusted. Finally, he gave all four a solution to end each person's problem. For Davian to let the dragon possess him, and for the other three to change their fate and liberate themselves. He wanted them to let him possess them, but Kaden woke up and rushed to stab him. Terrorblade was disappointed in Kaden, so he threw him into the wall, and he would have fallen off the fortress if Bram hadn't caught him in time. He then started to suck the fire dragon out of Davian, so Rin tried to split herself to attack him. He threw Rin away, so she had to teleport him high up. He then held her tightly to pull her to die together with the Knight Commander. Although she had stabbed his hand to make the Knight Commander's corpse release her, she no longer had the presence of mind to teleport away. Just as they were about to hit the ground, Davian transformed into his dragon form to fly and save her. He then flew off to deal with the remaining dragons, but at that moment, a girl riding a dragon named Riley arrived to help the whole group escape. Davian wanted to go alone to handle the chaos that Terrorblade had caused, but Kaden thought that him separating and going alone was exactly what Terrorblade wanted. Hearing this, he reluctantly decided to go with Kaden's group. Meanwhile, Marana had been separated from her soldiers and Marseille. The two sides were being transported in different vehicles, and because Luna also had a bounty on her head, the hunter allowed her to go with Luna. Marana's mount, noticing its master was in trouble, immediately ran after her. At the same time, Invoker had come to find the Dragon of Chaos to awaken it. The dragons gathered together once again, and they called on each other to rise up and fight against Terrorblade. They had been too complacent, and now were forced to fight back. The Chaos Dragon then still thought its companions were all talk and no action, so it created a big explosion, and then sent the souls of those dragons to Invoker. However, Invoker then turned on it and struck it with an extremely powerful blow. As for Davian, he realized that the dragon tooth necklace had been left behind in the fortress. Rylai and her dragon then took them back to the cave, and Rylai revealed that Cadden now owed her for the second time. Rin noticed that Davian seemed to be in the mood of someone who had suffered a loss and couldn't accept it. He still tried to act like he was fine. He asked if Rin was hurt anywhere, but she wanted him to never keep the thought in his head that he would harm her if he transformed into that half-dragon form. Bram, while walking around the cave, found a library. Rylai's dragon came by, and it was revealed to be the author of these books. Back to Marana, Luna had been taken away elsewhere while she was brought back to the palace, which used to be her home. She then saw her father's sword, ran up to cut her bonds, and threw the sword to cut down the chandelier and escape. But she quickly encountered the Viceroy, who had once taken care of her. She was disappointed that he had once served her father and now was serving her uncle who was trying to kidnap her. But he was serving her uncle according to the last wishes her father left behind. He then wanted her to just stay here where she would be safe. Luna, at this time, had been imprisoned and immediately demonstrated that she was the strongest person there by punching out the prison boss's mouth. A hairy old man named Rico then came to Luna and suggested that she had just made a mistake, as from now on she would have to sleep on high alert. But she wasn't afraid of anyone in there, so whoever wanted to come, she was ready to face them. Cadden now thought they needed to reclaim the fortress from the dragons soon because they needed the weapons inside. He wanted to gather more people, but Davian thought they shouldn't delay anymore because Terrorblade was strong enough to defeat even the king of the Earth Dragons, so gathering more people would be useless. But Cadden didn't want the beast inside Davian to escape again. The two then argued and neither would listen to the other's opinion. Rylai then had to go meet Cadden because she heard the story from Bram. She thought that sometimes Cadden shouldn't be too dictatorial because it seemed Davian really needed what he had lost. Davian then wandered around the cave and accidentally found a soul stone. It attracted him and Rin had to come wake him up. Davian then went to ask Rylai's dragon, and she revealed that she used to be near and guard that soul stone because she was attracted to it. But after a long sleep, she saw the changes in humans. From then on, she stayed away from the Soul Stone and started writing books and reciting poetry to experience life. She believed Davian should also interact with that Soul Stone, and maybe it would really tell him the answer he wanted. Invoker had now sealed the souls of the dragons in different eggs. The Dark Moon Goddess was still walking around the tower and beginning to remember her lost daughter. As for Marana, she met her uncle again and felt no joy at all. She hated her uncle because she believed he had killed her parents to seize the throne, and now he was bringing her back to be a symbol to call people to unification. Her uncle then left, and the Viceroy informed her that since her father's death, there had been internal division in the country. She refused to help her uncle because she would gain nothing from this. Moreover, Luna and the soldiers of the Dark Moon Forest would also have to die because they were seen as enemies of the public, as this country worshipped the sun, not the moon. Luna was now in pain and struggling. The prison boss came back to settle scores with her. In fact, they had known each other from 15 years ago, and the boss was very resentful because she had left them behind and escaped back then. But she still managed to take down 2 men on her own and was caught from behind by the boss. However, Old Man Rico came to help Luna, and she asked the boss if he wanted to join her team or not. Bram was sitting in thought when the Dragon Lady approached. She saw that Bram was different from other Dragon Knights. He thought he wasn't a Dragon Knight, but just a side character in someone else's story. She then gave Bram a ring and whipped her tail at him. A shield was created, helping Bram block the attack. She then wanted Bram to attack her with anything, and he threw a book. She rolled over in defeat and said that now Bram was a true dragon knight. Davian had come with Rin to the Soul Stone. He was still unsure whether he was Davian, a dragon knight, or a monster in this body. But Rin thought he had to walk in the darkness to see the light, meaning she wanted him to approach the Soul Stone and look inside himself to find the answer. As soon as he touched the Soul Stone, he met the fire dragon again. It told him that he and it were now one. Its blood flowed in him as his blood flowed in it. It had always been singing to him about how to defeat Terrorblade, but he couldn't hear. So now it would say briefly, he must find the relic of the Sun God, the Eye of the World. He then knew who he was and what he needed to do, so he gathered everyone and told them about the Sun God's relic. Rylai knew the place because it used to be her homeland until the Sun God took it over. He then realized that the Sun God's relic was related to Marana. Marana had now called the Viceroy to meet. She had thought carefully and decided to accept her uncle's request. Marana then went to find her uncle, who was planning to organize a national wedding for Marana. But she thought that since she had agreed to his conditions, now he had to agree to hers. He wanted a wedding, but she wanted an army. Meanwhile, the goddess had blamed Invoker for poisoning their daughter with his hatred for her. But he thought that their daughter had never hated her. The child had always longed for the day her mother would return. She loved her mother until her death. As for Rin, she now heard that her tribe's people were about to go to war, so she had to return to prevent it and couldn't continue with Davian. But he believed he was fine and let her leave. She then disguised herself and snuck onto a caravan to leave. As for Davian, he had planned with Cadden, and Cadden had given Bram a teleportation scroll so that as soon as Davian got the relic, he could quickly join forces with Cadden. Cadden said directly that his teammates had been killed by the creature inside Davian, so he would never trust it, but Davian should do what he had to do. Rylai then gave Davian a coin and told him to go find her sister, who would help him meet the king. He then went to Bram to see how preparations were going. Bram had finished preparing to go with him. Davian promised to protect Bram if he was eaten by the dragon lady, but she would never eat Bram because she considered him her life partner. Bram only now realized that the ring he was given was an engagement ring. That night, a group of people from the elf tribe came to a dam near a human village to attack. They destroyed the dam and caused the entire village to be submerged in water. The next day, Marana went to meet with the kingdom's council. They told her directly that they would still treat her as a princess and follow proper etiquette, but she would have no authority in this room at all. The female general later heard about the elf tribe planning to attack them, but they just needed to strengthen their defenses and let the elf tribe abandon their attack plans. However, Marana believed that once the elf tribe restored their dragon veins, they would appoint a new goddess, and at that point, they would be defeated, so the priority was still to attack first. The general rejected Marana's opinion and suggested that she was just trying to prevent her own goddess from disappearing, and they didn't need to invade that forest. Marana dismissed her and then went to complain to the vice general. She thought that the female general had never known the harshness of a real battle, and the only thing she had was wealth. The vice general thought that she had just made more enemies for herself and was as impetuous as her father before. Unwise actions would bring nothing, but Marana would rather act unwisely than do nothing at all. Meanwhile, in the prison, Luna had spent a day observing the behavior and guarding schedules of the guards. When she had enough information, she went to meet Rico and the boss's group to start planning. That evening, the Dragon Lady had brought Davian and Bram to the outside of the Sun God's kingdom. She then transformed into human form to enter with them. At the same time, Marana had gone to meet the Viceroy, and she thought that this country no longer needed a princess like her. However, life had taught her that to succeed, she needed help, and she needed him to teach her so she wouldn't follow in her father's footsteps from years ago. At that time, Davian's group had found Rylai's older sister and just met her. Davian and she seemed to have some familiar feeling. She then heard about Davian's group's story and led the whole group inside. At the same time, Invoker had met Terrorblade again. He thought that Invoker still hadn't delivered all 7 dragon souls to him, but Invoker only had the obligation to collect them, not to give him all of them. He knew well that Invoker was a cunning person, and that cunningness made no one able to touch him. However, he understood Invoker's nature, that he was just a lonely person. Although he had made deals with Invoker in all spaces, Invoker always lied and changed the terms blatantly. But he still believed that everything was under his control. He had mentioned Rin, and he knew her real name and where she was born, and soon Invoker would have to beg him to take away the dragon souls. Davian had now reached an agreement with Rylai's older sister. She promised to take him to meet the king to ask about the relic. However, she wasn't sure if he would be able to get the relic easily, but Davian believed that no one could refuse a dragon knight. However, that very night, Luna and the prisoners had started to rise up to escape. They had taken over the prison elevator and Rico had sneaked into the control room to bring them up. Soldiers were waiting up here to attack the elevator, but those inside had used the soldiers down there as shields. As soon as they escaped, Rylai's older sister had seen flares being shot up and decided to handle it. She then went down to the street and started to burn the escaping prisoners. Luna and Rico then changed direction to the castle to rescue Marana. Davian discovered her, so he chased after her. Bram also followed but was blocked by fire. Davian was catching up when suddenly Rico punched him, but Luna spoke up to help him so he could go along. The three of them then found Marana's location and wanted her to leave, but she had refused because she had decided to stay. Davian also went in, and before he could advise Marana, she had been shot by a golden arrow from that bounty hunter. Soldiers began to arrive, so Rico had to take Luna away from there. Luna decided to create a war to avenge Marana. And Davian, who stayed behind, was now seen as the one who had harmed their princess Marana. He didn't want to defend himself, so he resigned to being tied up. Meanwhile, the Dark Moon Goddess had begun to regret not trying to save her daughter years ago. She regretted that she couldn't do anything, but Invoker thought that she didn't even intend to try to save her daughter. Everything that happened to her from the beginning was because Rin had stolen the flowers, and soon she would become the goddess in her place. Rin was now with a caravan crossing the mountains when they were suddenly attacked by the elf tribe. She couldn't watch the people being killed anymore, so she stood up to stop her tribesmen. But her efforts were in vain, and in the end, only a father and child she protected survived. But the father was also afraid because she was of the same tribe as the savages who killed people. Meanwhile, Rylai's older sister, also known as Lena, had returned and exonerated Davian because she knew he wasn't the one who had harmed Marana. Davian had shown Lena the position where Luna had predicted the shooter of Marana was. He had never seen anyone shoot as far as Marana herself. Marana was now dreaming about her past. She had once been very arrogant until she met Marcy. At that time, Marcy looked quite wretched and could no longer speak. The Dragon Lady had now examined Marana and found that her survival was a miracle, because that arrow was certainly capable of killing her, but she had survived somehow miraculously. Continuing with Marana's past, she remembered when her father king taught her the lessons that a king needs to know, that sometimes they should know how to turn a blind eye. She was then told that Marcy would now become her servant, and thanks to her father's lesson, she decided to treat Marcy more as a friend than a servant. Meanwhile, Marana's uncle wanted the viceroy to find someone to blame for the princess's assassination, because now they couldn't send someone to catch that bounty hunter. So the uncle needed someone to blame and execute publicly. Luna, in the meantime, had followed Rico to a place to hire bounty hunters. Rico had taken Luna to meet the shop owner and informed that they were close to finding Venari, who had assassinated Princess Marana. But he thought that crime was already predetermined to be blamed on both of them, so Luna only asked to buy weapons. But she had no money, so Rico had to use the debt that the shop owner owed him to deduct instead. Both of them then left and didn't know any leads to find Venari. Suddenly, they encountered the captain who had betrayed them at the fortress earlier. They then followed and knocked him out, then took him to a place for interrogation. She was about to pour hot iron on his hand, but Rico stopped her and wanted a less barbaric way. So Luna asked him to release him so she could negotiate. Meanwhile, Davian was still sitting by Marana's bed. The viceroy informed that the king would soon meet him. He then went out to chat with Lena for a while when the viceroy came to report that the king was ready to meet him. We again continue to see Marana's past. One day, her family's palace was attacked and her parents were dead. Therefore, this beast commander had to be responsible for taking her to the emergency exit in the palace while he stayed behind to fight. But there were also enemies inside, and they had knocked Marcy down to capture Marana. But Marcy suddenly awakened her power and rushed to save Marana, and both of them then left together. Davian was now on his way to the king's room with Lena, but only Davian was allowed in. As soon as he entered, he requested the king to lend him the relic. But the king had everyone leave and asked why he needed it. He told about Terrorblade's matter, and that the dragon inside him needed the relic to stop Terrorblade. But the king hesitated because his words were a bit hard to verify. He thought that if he didn't hand it over, there would be no world left for him to rule. But he tried to portray himself as a supreme being, so Davian had to transform into dragon form and rush to grab him and fly away. He took him up high and gave him one last chance. But he didn't want to hand it over because he was afraid the people would discover that he didn't inherit the blood of the sun god. So Davian didn't hesitate to drop him from the top of the tower. Meanwhile, Luna had found Venari's location and rushed down to attack. She had dealt with the captain for betrayal and began to fight with Luna. Suddenly, flares were shot up again, and the man Rico was chasing unexpectedly unleashed a massive burst of fire. Luna then hazily woke up and surprisingly met Marseille again. Going back to earlier, when Marseille and the soldiers were being taken away, Mirana's mount had rushed there to save them, allowing Marseille to return here. Lena had now entered the battle and chased after Davian. She tried to call Davian to stop, but he was now controlled by the dragon. Lena wanted him to wake up, but the dragon said Davian had sunk deep into his consciousness, and if she was smart, she should hand over the relic quickly. But she wouldn't give it anything and would get Davian back. She then advanced to confront the flames and successfully pulled Davian out. He then woke up and was informed by Lena that the Viceroy had covered for him by telling everyone that he was the one who drove away the dragon, because they didn't want to reveal that someone close to the princess was involved in the Emperor's death. However, now she was quite sure that civil war would certainly happen. But Davian suggested that she could change everything if she stood up to unite this country, as she had power and the people's trust, and she was also the one who had brought him back when he was about to be swallowed by the dragon. Luna had now brought Rico to the shop owner's house to treat his wounds. Luna had told Marseille that Mirana was dying. At this moment, the palace was also holding a funeral for the king. Bram suddenly noticed that Mirana was showing strange signs. The dragon lady had all the windows open to let the sunlight in, and surprisingly, Mirana had returned to normal. The Viceroy was also surprised that she had recovered. However, currently, this needed to be kept secret to find the culprit. Mirana then also heard that her uncle was killed by a half-man, half-dragon. They couldn't say it directly for fear of information about Davian being leaked. Meanwhile, Rin was walking alone in the forest when she suddenly met an old woman. They rested together overnight, and after a while of conversation, the old woman gradually struck at Rin's mind. That's right, this was Terrorblade, and he had invaded Rin's mind, suggesting that she had been putting her faith in a liar and Invoker would always see her as a pawn to exploit. So what she needed to do was to stop listening to Invoker. Meanwhile, the general from the previous council had now pulled her troops away, but the Beast Commander and Lena wouldn't let that happen. Lena then went to meet Davian, and she thought she was wrong to have once thought that without the king, the council would take power and turn this place into a better place. Yet now the truth slapped her in the face. The soldiers of the nobles now occupied the streets, and just a small spark would start a civil war. She had made her decision, and she had chosen to become the regent of this kingdom, a person who would lead and command the entire country. She then went to debate with that general, and the struggle for the throne now became an election. But the Viceroy and the Beast Commander had decided to bring Mirana back to the people. But Lena argued that Mirana had previously abandoned the throne and fled to the Night Silver Woods. Yet now she wanted to reclaim it just because of bloodline reasons. If she took power now, she would drag everyone into war in the Night Silver Woods. All the officials and people chose to listen to someone without power who rose up on their own like Lena rather than Mirana. And that general also surprisingly turned to support Lena, so now she naturally became the leader of the country. Lena then stood before the people to affirm her position, and she also came to Mirana to confide. She didn't think what Mirana was trying to do was wrong, but she didn't want to proactively wage war with the elf tribe. So if the elf tribe invaded their territory, she would personally burn them down. Mirana then left and met Davian again. She was very disappointed because he had caused too much trouble, from coming here to unleashing the dragon to kill the emperor and causing her country to fall into this situation. Now she has no army to confront the elf race. and she no longer believes this is the Davian she once knew. He used to fight for her and do his best to resist the dragon, yet now he follows the dragon's orders. That night, Mirana met Marseille again and followed her to Luna's group. Luna informed her that she had two pieces of news. The good news was that they had tracked down the location of the bounty hunter, and the bad news was that the person who hired her was the one who had just been crowned that very day. The next morning, Mirana promised to bring back an army to reclaim what she had lost. Luna once didn't understand why the goddess accepted Mirana, but now she understood and was ready to follow her. Meanwhile, Lena had taken out the relic for Davian, but when he touched it and let the dragon inspect it, it seemed to be a fake. Or perhaps it wasn't fake, but there was never any relic to begin with. Maybe even the dragon within him wasn't sure what it needed. Mirana now wanted to tell Davian the truth about Lena, but Bram thought that both Davian and he didn't see Lena as a bad person. Mirana thought Bram was defending Lena, but he was defending Davian because Davian had a good eye for people. At the same time, Invoker had brought Rin back to his tower. He wanted her to correct her mistake of not bringing Davian there by meeting the Dark Moon Goddess and reclaiming power from her, as she was the reincarnation of the Moon Goddess. Mirana had returned to meet the Viceroy and informed him about Lena. He believed that even if the entire Senate trusted her, they might not be willing to turn their backs on Lena, but he had a way to help her. Meanwhile, Davian had given up on the relic, and Lena advised him to face the truth that there was no relic at all. But he felt that he had killed someone and started a war, and now the world was about to be destroyed while he was here looking like a fool. Lena then confessed that the person who assassinated Mirana was her own, as she thought that by assassinating Mirana, the Senate would force the king to abdicate. But the king was killed by Davian instead. She had planned to lie to him, but felt more guilty and lonely the more she hid it from him, so she had to confess. Davian then left to find Bram, and Bram, seeing that he knew the truth, felt relieved that he didn't have to tell him. Mirana then asked to be alone with Davian, and he apologized for not being able to help her and causing her so much trouble. Invoker then told Rin about her origins, and now, with the elf race in chaos, they needed her to become a goddess to lead them. What she needed to do was kill the Dark Moon Goddess to reclaim her power. He would give her the power to do so. Back to Davian, Mirana believed the relic was real because she had seen its power, but it seemed to have been swapped by someone. She needed to find someone who could give her the necessary information. She then went to the tavern to find the beast commander. She asked about what happened on the night the castle was attacked. He wasn't sure how her parents died, but only heard sounds, and the only ones with enough authority to access the relic besides the king could only be the Viceroy. Everyone then suspected that the Viceroy was the one who swapped the relic because on the night Davian killed her uncle, the Viceroy seemed to just stand and watch. Meanwhile, Rin had gone to find the Dark Moon Goddess, and she recognized her as the one who stole her lotus. She had a weapon ready and asked what else she wanted to take from her, but she only led her to her daughter's grave. At this moment, she began to drain the life from the flower field and restore her power. Invoker had just realized and arrived, but she was already gone. He believed that Rin didn't know what terrible thing she had just released into the world. The Viceroy had now found Lena. He believed she wasn't worthy of being a king because the king and the Senate were a machine. Each person needed to know their job and operate it. The king was a gear to operate the machine, not the one directing it. Lena thought he was forgetting his position, but he had the relic in his hand, so Lena's fire could do nothing to him. He would make her pay for daring to touch his princess. As for Rin, she still believes that she is not worthy of being a goddess and wants the Dark Moon Goddess to continue as before. However, nothing will return to how it was before. The next morning, Davian's group arrived at the Viceroy's house to find him. They reached a door that seemed to be where the Viceroy had hidden the holy relic, but he had returned and informed them that he wasn't keeping it. Davian still argued that the relic in the palace wasn't genuine, but the Viceroy claimed it simply didn't work as Davian thought. The relic only works for the true heir, Mirana, so he had helped her become the new ruler. Realizing something was wrong, they asked where Lena was, only to learn that the Viceroy had killed her the night before. Davian, enraged, unleashed his dragon, but as he lunged forward, the Viceroy blocked him and threw him through the other door. Inside were two crystals, red and blue. The Viceroy then transformed into a demon. At that moment, Luna's group suddenly felt the goddess's power within them again. The goddess later came to find Luna's group, but Luna and her forces now chose to reject such a tyrant. Angered, the goddess withdrew her power. Luna's group continued to carry out missions for Marana. The goddess then granted power to the soldiers being held captive by the elf, who rose up and ravaged the elven tribe once more. Terrorblade was confident that Rin no longer trusted Invoker, thinking that without Rin, Invoker's plan would fail. However, Invoker always had contingency plans. Meanwhile, the Viceroy was actually a dragon, and the Ice Dragon had to rush out to push him back, asking Bram to take Marana to the palace and retrieve the relic. She then transformed into her dragon form to fight. But as soon as they left, Bram reconsidered. He wanted to help Davian and the one who had agreed to be with him. Marana didn't force Bram to follow her, so she let him go back. Right after, the Ice Dragon was thrown out here. Bram rushed to use the ring to create a shield to protect his love, but they grabbed her and slammed her hard to the ground. The Viceroy ignored Bram, seeing him as nothing more than a mouse. Bram, heartbroken, ran to his love and wondered how he could help her, but she passed away shortly after. The fire dragon within Davian now recognized its nature, and Davian finally understood the true nature of the relic. More accurately, the power of the relic had always been with them. What the dragon wanted was the power within Marana, so it was willing to ignore if she died. However, Davian couldn't accept that. The dragon asked if he was willing to bet on the possibility that he might not return if he gave control to it, and he was ready. The Viceroy had now grabbed that female general and chose her as the new regent. His demand was for her to bring the princess to him unharmed. Bram had used the teleportation scroll to bring Cadden here. Marana was stuck at the palace gate because that female general had been ordered to bring her to the Viceroy. She was about to use force to compel her, but the Viceroy had arrived. Cadden wanted Bram to go with him to destroy the Viceroy, but the fire dragon flew out and wanted to negotiate a truce with Cadden to deal with the Viceroy first. As the Viceroy grabbed Marana, the fire dragon flew in and breathed fire on his head. Marana fell but was caught by Marcy. However, the Viceroy had caught the fire dragon and was preparing to strike, forcing Cadden to attack to redirect that blow. The fire dragon then breathed fire to push back the Viceroy. Marana was now guided by the Beast Commander and his army to enter the palace. The two dragons stood arguing, and Cadden had to rush forward to fight. The Viceroy, or rather the Thunder Dragon, although attacked by both, still managed to grab the fire dragon and throw it aside. Even though Cadden tried to land a powerful blow on it, it was ineffective. The Thunder Dragon threw him away and began to emit a widespread lightning ball, forcing the fire dragon to shield Cadden. The Viceroy then turned towards the castle. Meanwhile, Marana had touched the holy relic and saw truths she had never known before. The Viceroy had returned outside and thrown the commander aside. He entered and knew Marana had seen the truth. She repeatedly shot arrows at him, but it was useless. He then grabbed her and revealed that he was once one of the 8 dragons, the Dragon of the Void. But when he found those 2 spirit stones, he had discovered the truth of life, to serve the sun. He had transformed and served this country for 3,000 years, and she was the one he cherished most. At this moment, she let her mount and Marcy rush out to attack him. Marcy could punch through his layer of darkness, but was soon caught by him. He squeezed Marcy nearly to death, forcing Marana to speak up, wanting to compromise with him. But he ignored her and killed Marcy. At that moment, Marana awakened the power of the sun and completely incinerated him, but she couldn't save Marcy. When she came out, she thanked Bram and everyone for helping her in this battle. The fire dragon also came to meet her and said it could now rest assured because she would be able to protect this world from Terrorblade. It also asked her to tell Davian that he was now free. The dragon then disappeared and returned freedom to Davian. Marana then ascended to the throne as queen and began to repair the country. But the losses remained, and the film temporarily ends here.